Wanda has worked as a consultant astrologer and holistic therapist for many years. She is the current president of the Astrological Lodge of London. She is also its current program organizer and co-editor of the Astrology Quarterly magazine. She also edits the Astrology and Medicine newsletter for the Astrological Association of Great Britain. She has taught in Europe and Japan and has several books on astrology to her credit. These include the Consultation Chart, Introduction to Medical Astrology, Introduction to Decumbrature, and the most recent, which we're going to be talking about today, is Chart Shapes, the Code to Interpretation. She has also written 2 books on aromatherapy. Oh, wonderful. Wanda holds a diploma from the Mayo School of Astrology and is a qualified Horary practitioner, having trained with Olivia Barclay. She is also trained as a counselor and regression therapist, the latter at Regent's College under Dr. Keith Hearn. Healing and astrological counseling have been her life's work, and her interest in astrology ranges from traditional to esoteric. So it's a great pleasure to have you today, Wanda, and I'm going to pass on the baton to you.
Thank you. I was noticing when you were promoting your courses then and what was saying on the screen, and what caught my attention was 5,000 years of astrology. Well, chart shapes isn't quite 100 years old. It's pretty new compared to 5,000 years of astrology. And I suppose a lot of astrologers throughout the ages have introduced new stuff, and this rather caught my attention because I began to work with it and found it really worked. Now, I mean, I was amazed really, because I have been trained traditionally, but then I'm also into the psychological and esoteric on different levels. And this was something new. Now, the first person who brought this into our consciousness was Mark Edmund Jones. He pioneered this around the middle of the 20th century. And it was his idea, in fact. He brought this, and it's a wonderful book, The Guide to Horoscope Interpretation, which is about chart shapes. But like most things, it can be developed, and it was so developed by Robert C. Jansky in the early 70s. So it went, for a few decades before he took the baton. And he obviously used Mark Edmund Jones's ideas to a certain degree, but he formulated his own and slightly changed names of the 7 principal charts. What I think is quite good about this method of interpreting a chart is that it can be augmented. It can use your own thoughts. So it is not actually set in stone. But there is a basis to it. And then, obviously, as you see, I'm promoting my book here, although it's being promoted quite well already. I brought it to my consciousness in this century. And I used, obviously, the 2 books that I've just mentioned, but I used my own experience as well and my own thoughts. And there is so much on the internet, and I did look at the internet and saw what other people were saying about chart shapes, and some I agreed with, some I didn't. As I said, it evolves. This can evolve, and so I think ultimately you have rules in every branch of astrology, but you have to make the chart sing. So it's you, the astrologer, that evolves with the astrology. So that's the background of where I got my knowledge, so to speak. Now, The wonderful thing about chart shapes is the concept of it is that it helps you get into the chart. I think that's one of the most important issues when taking up a natal chart. I'm talking about nativities rather than any other form. You say, where do I start? Well, we've probably all worked out our own ways of doing this. But chart shapes, looking at the concept of chart shapes, it does help you make that first move, which I think is really its most important point. Now, when you look at a chart, most of the time you just see a lot of different planets all over the chart, and it doesn't make any shape unless you're looking for one, looking for a shape. And once you've got one of the 7 modes, the 7 shapes in your mind, you can choose which shape the chart you're looking at falls into. And once you've got a shape in your mind, the chart then begins to almost develop a personality, and the chart and the planets aren't just all over the place. But a quick glance may at times determine the shape of the chart, your choice of the 7, but not always, because not every chart is ideal or fits into the ideal shape that you're looking at. Sometimes you have a planet that sort of stands outside the shape. So just looking at a chart quickly determining a shape doesn't always work. You have to really sort of study it. And the most important thing is you only look at the 10 planets. You don't look at the nodes, Chiron, or anything else when determining the shape. But obviously, all the other things you then can use in your analysis. But just to determine the shape, you just need the 10 planets. Sometimes it's best just to set up a chart with the 10 planets and leave the other things out if you can, because it might be clearer for you. Now, there are 7 basic shapes. That's what Jones came up with, and that's indeed what Jansky decided upon. But there are variations, and I've put all these variations in my book. What we have to remember too is that no shape is better than any other at all. The shape just describes, say, an initial approach to life. Now, many charts do not fall into the idealized pattern that you're looking at. They just come close. But planets outside the idealized pattern may be significant. Now, there are new terms. If you're not used to looking at a chart through its shape with planets, and I'm not talking about shapes that can be made by the aspects like grand trines and T-squares and kites and all the others. I'm not that is a separate issue entirely. You probably realize that, but I thought I'd better mention it. But just looking at how the planets shape up. Now, there are new terms to look at. You'll probably hear me talking about boundary planets, which usually are 2 planets looking at each other without planets in between. Then there's a high focus planet, which may be a planet standing outside the shape. And then you may hear me talk about leading planet, which I think Jansky refers to as the cutting planet. So new terms have come in. And then you would look at the chart in the normal way of, when you come to an analyzing the chart, you use your fortunes, infortunes, mental planets, outer planets. You use your normal way of analyzing the chart, but let's say coming into it a little bit differently. So rules of engagement, you judge by the 10 planets and you look at the characteristics of any outstanding planets. You normally look at the dominant elements and quadruplicities, the boundary planets. Then there's the leading planet, as I said. There's also the trailing planet. You usually look at your singleton, and there is an associated planet with each shape. One of the 7 traditional planets will connect to one of the shapes. Now, this is not set in stone. I've noticed that some people say certain planets connect with certain shapes, and I've worked this out myself. I may be wrong. Again, as I said, this is not set in stone, but something to bear in mind, and I will be explaining this further. Now, just before I go on to the 7 planets, I'm going to just consult my notes just to see if there's something I missed out here. Now, it is quite possible that 2 astrologers looking at a chart may come to a different conclusion as to its shape. So which astrologer is right? Both of them, because it's you, the astrologer, who's going to analyze the chart and how it seems to you. Now, it is important. Now, it could be that long before chart shapes and this talk, you've looked at charts in a way and they immediately make a shape, or they appear something to you. And whatever and they may not be one of the 7 normal shapes that Jones and Jansky came up with, but something appeared to you, and that's important. So if 2 astrologers come up with 2 different ideas, and that's happened to me and another astrologer, we came in with different ideas, which, nobody's wrong or right, or let's say you're both right, because you take it from where you are. I mentioned that, there are 7 designated shapes, with their variations. And if you're looking at a chart that kind of fits one of those shapes, but not entirely, then and there's a planet that stands out, I said, that could be the high focus planet. That could be the very planet you want to look at because it's not fitting in to the normal shape. So human beings are complex, and the more complex they are, so will their charts be, usually. We go on to the first chart, the first shape, is the splash chart. Now, this looks very much like an idealized picture of a splash chart with planets fitting into almost every house. Of course, they can only fit into 10 houses, as we're dealing just with 10 planets. But you're not going to get charts fitting in so easily. You may find that there could be a conjunction somewhere, and there are about 2 houses that are empty. I think once you start looking at 3 empty houses, it's not a splash chart. Again, don't take these rules as gospel truth. If it still appears as if the chart is a splash chart to you, then that's how you look at it. Now, what are the general thoughts of a splash chart? Well, I think, as you can imagine, it is likely to be someone who is multi-talented often, and someone who can go through boundaries very easily because they can relate to many different kinds of people and circumstances and environments. They're probably the very person that can feel great at a party. They can talk to anyone at all. You put them on another planet and they'd probably find friends there as well, because of that way of finding something new in life and not being thwarted by it. You know, they love being out of their comfort zone, really. They have a wide range of interest, and they spreading ideas far and wide, and so they can adapt to any situation. So very versatile. Now, that would be a brief summary of the splash person. Okay, lovely, Melissa. That's great. So listen carefully to the next thought here. Look at the associated planet, which I'm sure most of you might have an idea. This is where I love interacting with people, because you could probably all tell me. You can put it in the yes, you're absolutely right, Amina. Yeah, oh, I've got 2 parentheses, right? At Mercury. So look at Mercury. So you've decided that it's a splash chart. So you want to look at Mercury to see, because Mercury obviously is a multi-talented, multitasking kind of planet. You want to see, does it uphold that idea of the splash qualities? If it's in another air sign, I think somebody pointed that out, air sign, yes. Right. If it's in an air sign, the chances are it will uphold those qualities. You've got someone here who is even more of a person who loves to communicate with others and is very versatile. But if it's, say, in I'm seeing all these messages, but they're lovely, but I can't always understand them. I've got me too here.
Wanda, I wouldn't worry about the messages. Callum will take care of those.
Okay, then. Okay, so yes, look at the where Mercury is positioned, its sign, its house, all of the aspects that it gets. See whether it upholds the idea. That might be too much of a good thing, but you may well get somebody extremely clever with more air if it's in an air sign. It obviously, in Earth, it will tone some of that versatility into maybe more specialized routes. So none of this will be bad at all. You just want to see how far that Mercury upholds the general idea of a splash chart. Can't go into sort of every sign really, but you've got the idea. So we look at the first splash example. I've tried to have as many charts as possible here. Now, you all have heard of Louise Hay, I think. She was a writer. She died not long ago. She was a writer on health matters and psychological health, basically, and started her own publishing house. Now, right now, where do you begin with a splash chart? So you've determined the shape, you've determined its general qualities, you're looking at Mercury. So here we see Mercury's in an air sign, which is quite wonderful. It does uphold the fact that she was a writer and worked with her mind. That's right. 3 empty houses. As I said, not every chart will, I'm afraid, follow the absolute rules. You have to bring it as close as you can. Yes, you're going to have empty houses over the chart, naturally. Because I said, not every 10 houses will be full. You bring a chart to its shape as close as you can. Now, as I said, I'm not looking at the aspects to begin with. I'm looking at Mercury to see how it upholds the basic idea of the versatility of the splash chart. I can't read all the messages. I'm sorry. I'm going to get confused. But it would be lovely.
Sorry, let me just interrupt. If you've got any, the chat's fantastic. I love all the conversations. If you've got any specific questions for Wanda, please put them in the Q&A box. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. So sorry to interrupt. Carry on.
No, not at all. Not at all. I love getting those messages, but then I'm going to be put off my stride, I'm afraid.
Wanda, the chat box is for participants to chat amongst themselves. So you don't have to pay attention. And if they have questions for you, they're going to put them in the Q&A box. Yes, and when it's Q&A time, we'll get them to you. So if you want to just focus on the presentation, that would be great.
Yes, lovely. And if you see a discrepancy, which is, very valid, like one person said, or there's more empty houses than you would normally have in a splash chart, by all means, bring something like that up, because as the answer was, you're not going to get an ideal each time. The so-called rules are just guidance, basically. You have to decide for yourself ultimately. Now, so we've looked at Mercury. Now, with a splash chart, where do you go to begin the interpretation? You go to the core opposition, and you find the core opposition with the fastest moving planets. And they actually happen to involve that Mercury. It's the Moon, Mercury, opposing Chiron and the MC. So Moon, Mercury in the 4th house, conjunct the IC, opposing. So it's the MC-IC axis, which involves the family. And this is where her life started, as it does with all of us, with the family. But this is where she, as you can see, Moon, Mercury, Chiron, she had her first pain. And this is what she wrote about. She wrote about people, her pain and people's pain. And then you would move to what else is in the house under consideration, and that is Mars and Saturn across the MC, the 4th and 10th house, which again upholds what may have happened in her early life. So this is where you would begin in the interpretation. I'm not going to go into the whole chart, obviously, because there's so many here to look at, but these are just examples, right? With the next one. Now, Oscar Wilde, again, you know, there are some charts that, some houses that are missing, that are empty, but it comes as near as possible to the splash shape. As you can see, it will never be exactly right, exactly ideal. You have to go with your nearest thoughts. So again, you look at the core opposition, and this happens to be Mercury, Uranus. And of course, Mercury is also the planet that is associated with the splash chart. And he was a writer as well. I think you must all know his wonderful works, very, very witty, very cutting, as they may be, with Mercury in Scorpio, opposition Uranus. Then you would move to, and as the third house, which very much to do with his writing. But third, ninth house, that was the law, and I think many of us remember his, well, we won't remember, but we should know, perhaps know about what brought him down eventually was a lawsuit. But basically, you would look at the third house here as being so very important in his chart. And Mercury in Scorpio, as I said, he was versatile. There's no doubt about it. But with the Scorpio element, he was quite deep. And when you think about third house as being very much connected to communication and maybe a bit light-hearted to some extent, because it has that Gemini quality. But Scorpio will bring a depth behind that light-heartedness, and his plays are very much like that. They appear very funny, but there's also a sort of deep truth within them. So that's like a beginning. I'm looking very much at beginnings of each of these charts and their interpretation. And what you would also do is you would bring in your normal way of analyzing a chart, and you'd look at the dignities and debilities, and then go into the shapes, like somebody already pointed out. Oh, this chart's got, I forget what they said, maybe a grand trine or whatever. Yes, you bring everything in that you know and that you usually use. I'm talking about where you begin the interpretation. So we go on to the locomotive, which is quite close to a splash chart. It also is someone who is very much a person who likes to communicate and is versatile, but they've got, let's say, more of a one-pointed drive, and the drive will come from the lead planet. You just go into the empty 3 and then move anti-clockwise, and that is your lead planet. And it is a planet that will drive the others. Now, this is where you need to, again, like before, as I said, look at the planet. Is it in dignity or debility? Is it exactly, looks like a train? It's called a locomotive chart, and we'll be looking at the train, as somebody just mentioned train, and we'll be looking at the idea of train and one of the charts in a moment. So this is, so Melissa, you will look at this particular part of the talk with interest, I'm sure. These are what you call boundary planets. This one here, the lead planet. This one here is a boundary planet too. That's the lead planet or cutting planet, and that's the trailing planet. Now, the idea is if you have a very strong lead planet, then you can start, let's say, start projects off with strength, with ideas that will take you, excuse me, take you far. And if you have a strong trailing planet, then again, it's an idea that your projects will end well. If you have a weak leading planet, then you may not always find everything you need to make that start as easily as let's say someone with a stronger planet. But I shouldn't let that worry you. Once you're aware of what is happening with your lead planet, so to speak, and that it's not strong, see where it's actually taking you, see where the pitfalls are. So you've got lead planet or cutting planet and trailing planet. Now, this is where it's good to sort of see what planets they are. If sometimes you get an idea straight away. If it's Mercury, Jupiter, then you know you've got somebody here with mental acumen, that love the mind. If it's Venus, Mars, for instance, then it's more of a people's person, more creative person. If you have outer planets in these positions, you've got somebody who may be swept away with the collective. If it's Mars, Saturn, then you've got a soldier or somebody who has to fight a lot of life's battles. So basically, you've got somebody with the locomotive who is usually very much someone, once they make a start, and you know the old steam motive locomotives, they would, when they made a start, it was chug, 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 very slow start. So you have to look at the starting planet, the leading planet. You know, is it Saturn? Then you know it's not going to be a fast beginning, but it may be a sure beginning. And once they start, it's very hard to make them stop. And they can wear themselves out, but they can carry people through with sheer force of their personality, even slight manipulation. They may ride roughshod over others, which is great in battle, I should imagine. So they'd be wonderful as someone who's battling for a goal of some kind. And so they may appear callous because of this, but so there's a lot of strength there, but they're not necessarily callous. It just means that they're not always aware because they're just moving forward. Okay, somebody's asked about empty houses within the train. No, you may have an empty house. You may well have. As I said, these are idealized pictures. Whoops. These are idealized here. There may be an empty house to contend with, but the chart still looks at starts maybe. I mean, I've got a locomotive chart, but I've got an empty house as well. In fact, two, but it's still a locomotive, usually because of these three empty houses and the somewhat regular, if not entirely regular, pattern of planets through the train. Now, There usually is a trine between those two planets, so you know it for a locomotive. If there's not, the chances are that at least in two signs that are in trine to each other. Right, so let's look at the first chart for a locomotive. As you see, it's Martin Luther King, the civil rights leader. And here you've got almost 3 empty houses, which is part of a locomotive, but you've got that trine between Neptune and Saturn is the lead planet here. So it was somebody who did not begin things on the spur of the moment, was not impulsive, but thought things through with that Saturn being the lead. And in Sagittarius and the 8th house, because this is where you would begin with the lead planet, his life was beset by legal wranglings with the law and very much into struggle, as I say, struggle with civil rights, and had many, and it's the 8th house, death, had many death threats, and had to struggle with attempts on his life, which, as you all know, I'm sure, that ultimately, you know, he was assassinated. You would begin to look at, you know, the dignities of that Sagittarius, and then you see that it's opposing Mars, so you immediately have the strength of the man, but you know what he had to face as well, and it's linked into that moon. So he fought Mars Saturn for the people moon. You can look at it that way. Now, I said that there's something interesting about a train. So it looks like a train, somebody said. Well, Martin Luther King spent most of his time on a train, crisscrossing the whole countryside, going from city to city. So here is a living example of a locomotive, and he was on a train. I suppose he could have used flight, you know, but he didn't. I don't know why, but maybe it was, what was it, back in the 60s? Well, somebody's got a different idea, saying somebody else, are they sorry, I won't look at the I started reading the notes again, but I shouldn't. It is
That's
off-putting.
okay, Wanda. We've got a couple of the similar questions coming in. Can you explain again the leading and trailing planets?
Okay, you look at the leading planet. It's counterclockwise. Let's go back. It will lead. You go into the empty spaces, and you move counterclockwise, and the first planet you meet is the leading planet. And so the one behind is the trailing planet. Okay. Any other questions?
No, thank you. We can leave the rest to the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Okay,
And
right.
again, don't worry about the chat. We'll keep that towards the end. And
Yes,
we're good to go.
I will. I won't worry about it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Right. Next. Whoops. Now, I have chosen most of the charts I've chosen are linked to America, because I thought you would know those people better. Mind you, there was a good question just then. Somebody asked me what the associated planet was for Locomotive. And, you know, when I do miss things out like that, by all means, do ask. I think you probably all guess that it's Mars, because the ideal for a locomotive is to go quickly. Okay, so we should have looked at Mars here. You're going back to Martin Luther King, that we saw that Saturn was in opposition to Mars, the associated planet, and obviously an opposition will always bring strife. So moving on to Johann Wolfgang Goethe, who was basically a German politician in the 18th century, and he was into just about everything. However, you know, he was into mineralogy, he was into color, he was into healing. But what he is mainly remembered for is, if we look at the empty spaces, and here you see it's a little bit more than the 3 usually you get, it's 4, but there still is a trine between the 2 boundary planets, and the leading planet is Neptune, which kind of goes against, let's say, a fast moving locomotive, because Neptune's, if anything, is very much an inner planet looking inside of themselves and being torn in lots of different directions. But it's also linked to poetry, and that is what he is basically remembered for these days, as a poet, in fact. So maybe this is showing, you know, the soul of the man, that he was a poet. Now, as I said earlier, I'm a bit like the Locomotive and Splash. I'm into sort of different areas of astrology, and I also look at esoteric astrology. Now, if I were looking at that chart, which I am, and saw Neptune in Cancer, I would immediately know that this was a highly evolved spiritual man, because Neptune rules Cancer on an esoteric soul level. Now, that is not necessarily what you have to keep in mind today, but I'm saying you bring your own way of dealing with a chart, bring your own ideas and what is important to you. So that would tell me, and of course it's water, isn't it? Neptune in Cancer, trine Jupiter in Pisces. So you've got 2 strong boundary planets, strong in the sense, then they're not strong like Mars and Saturn. I don't mean strong in that way, but strong astrologically, because to me, to my mind, Neptune in Cancer is strong because it's esoteric strength, and Jupiter in Pisces is in rulership. But mind you, it is, you would take note that it's retrograde, of course, and of course he did have many setbacks in his life. But I think things like retrogrades and other so-called difficulties in a chart aren't bad. They just make the person, gives them something to fight for. So, but basically what we're looking at here is the poetry of the man, Neptune and Jupiter. So there's poetry, there's compassion, the healing that came through. And if we're looking at Mars as associated planet, then we see it's very strong in exaltation. And it is in the second, trine the MC and the Sun. So behind that poetic exterior, you do have a very ambitious person who wants to get ahead. So you may come to these ideas going into this chart from a totally different perspective, from a different view. So chart shapes is just one way of going into the chart. Now, moving on to, whoops. I think this is, I've got the panel, it's come down on my screen, yes, Cameron Diaz. Now, I again, it's not ideal because there are quite a few houses that are empty and there isn't a real aspect between the two boundary planets, because as I said, do not look at nodes and Chiron and Fortuna and all of those things, not in your initial assessment. Look at them obviously in analysis when you put them in later in your mind's eye. So I'm showing these different charts, say, to show you that not every chart is an ideal to the shape you're looking at. So you don't have a trine aspect between Moon and Jupiter, because these are what you call the boundary planets. So, and you don't have kindred signs either. So it makes the person a little more complex. Now, I don't know anything about Cameron Diaz, except that she's highly successful. And that shows with the two boundary planets, because you've got Moon in Taurus, which is exalted. And Moon's always good as a boundary planet because it links you to the people and you need the public for success. And Jupiter in rulership is obviously going to bring some joy and happiness and success. So we do know. Now, this is what you would look at. You'd look at that Moon in Taurus and the Jupiter in Sagittarius as being like two discordant signs. And if this was a client, you would look at that and discuss it. How would that be in her chart? Where would it go? Would it be, I don't know, I'm only suggesting, that she begins with that Moon in Taurus as a way of looking for success, you know, in groups, in her life generally. After all, that Moon is sextile Venus and linked to the nodes and the horizon. But would she end up ultimately still being successful, because that's the idea you've come up with in the first instance, two very strong astrologically speaking, traditionally strong. Jupiter in the sixth house, would she have changed her career or her values in some way, that she would want to do something else with her life? So when you see a discordant from the ideal, it's not bad. It's not making you annoyed because it doesn't fit the picture. It's making you think, what can I discuss with the client here now? Because I see two different energies. Okay. So now we're a little bit more familiar with boundary planets. I just want to say, go over this again. I sort of vaguely mentioned it or generally mentioned it earlier. Look at what they are, the boundary planets. So if you've got two outer planets, the person gets caught up with the collective. If you have with the boundaries, Mercury, Jupiter, person who concentrates on their mentality. They love the mind. or projects to do with the mind. Moon Jupiter, success with public, as we've just seen with Cameron Diaz going back. But remember, this is what you look at. You look, it's as close as to a locomotive as you can get, but and it has wonderful boundary planets because they're strong exaltation and in rulership, but there's no aspect. So this is so you know it's a chart, it was a success, but the fact that they move out of the ideal is what should be part of the analysis. Moon, Venus as boundary planets, well, that is lovely because you're just going to be loved, liked, admired. And if you're popular, you can get very far in life. But you may have unrealistic expectation. It's the same with Venus and Jupiter. You're going to have success generally, although things may come a little bit too easily. Mars, Saturn, well, you're just going to have to get over all those challenges that come your way, but it does give you strength. And Mars, Pluto, I have noticed, gives great courage. It gives great courage. Okay, so we go on to the bowl shape. Now, I'd say this is probably the most common shape that there is. It usually within 6 houses, but it can just go over to a 7th house.
Hello, Wanda. Sorry to interrupt. Loving the presentation. I'm just saying we've got about 30 minutes left in the presentation. I'm quite happy to go.
Really? Oh my
yes,
God.
It's been great. It's been fantastic. I'm just saying I can definitely go over, and anyone who can't stay for extra time, they can watch on the replay. But I think we've got I don't know, Donna, an extra hour if we need to. I'm just saying in terms of time, my apologies, but it's yeah.
I didn't realize where the time had gone.
Through.
I don't know. I'll have to speed up a little bit. So this is definitely, so I've got to take that half an hour as lecture time.
Well, we can still go over. We can extend. I just wanted to give you a heads up on
yes,
the
you did say so. The question can come after that. Okay. So this is the most common shape I've noticed. Now, it usually means that the person works within close parameters, which is pretty good for making things count, but they're not very happy about going outside their comfort zone. So yes, that they could become more of a specialist, great self-reliance, but with things that they know. And they don't waste energy, they don't waste time. As I say, if you've got my book, you'll be able to read more on the bowl shape. Now, I've just got 2 charts here that show you a bowl shape, people that you're very familiar with, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And you can see with Joe Biden, it goes over the 6 houses, and that's the moon. But the moon will be also, if we're looking at things as boundary planets here, we see it's Venus and moon. I know the moon is very strong in exaltation, and not that I know much about him really, except obviously I've been following his demise, so to speak. But I get the impression he's a very popular man. And the moon, again, you know, as a boundary planet, will be very much to do with the people. I don't know if it's the most common, but I have seen it come through. And I think after reading somebody just said if it's the most common, then people don't like leaving their comfort zone. Well, after reading things on Facebook, I think that's true. I don't think people do like leaving their comfort zone because they're always talking about themselves, what's happening to them. But it doesn't mean to say that people with a bold chart are limited in any way. It's just they are more concerned with what is happening in their locality. And the locality may be the world, you know, as these two presidents, but they will keep their mind focused on whatever it is. Now, if we look at Donald Trump, we see that it seems as if there is more here to do with a bold chart, but there is a little bit of a break over here between Jupiter and Moon. But so you would look at that Moon conjunct the South Node and know that despite everything, is a very popular man as well. They were both popular in their own different ways. But with Moon in Sagittarius and South Node, and if you think of Sagittarius ruling the legs, you know, he would. I always think that whenever he opens his mouth, he puts his foot in it. Now, you may be people who love Donald Trump, you know, maybe you want to vote for him. So I'm not talking about politics or anything like that. It's just he doesn't seem to mind what he says. Okay, Ernest Hemingway, he again, you see that it's as close as you can get to a bowl type of chart. But it does go over the 6 houses of an ideal situation, and you have Moon and Pluto as the boundary planets. And he was a journalist, you know, that and a writer, as you know, and he did travel the world. So a bold chart person isn't going to just sit at home, but he concentrated very much on what he liked to do, and that was kind of war and struggle, which is very much to do with that Pluto. It's the Moon. Associated planet is the Moon because of the moon-like shape. So you would obviously look at the Moon in these charts, which I can't stop to do, unfortunately, because I am now pushed with my locomotive chart to move much more quickly. So this is a bucket type chart, which is like a bowl, but it has one planet standing ideally well away from the main planets. However, that's not always the case. To some extent, if we go back to Donald Trump, we see that the Moon there can almost give you a bucket type chart because it's standing away from the rest. So your focus would go on that. Now, the bucket will have the same kind of qualities as the bowl chart, sort of very much engaged with the things that interest them. So, you know, when the person said that they don't go out of their comfort zone, it's not someone who won't leave their house. It's someone who will concentrate on the things that interest them. And they will move all their interests through that handle. Some people call it bucket, some basket. I don't like the words myself, but
And sorry,
right.
let me just interrupt one more time. I've got about an hour, so don't have to rush too much. If you need to get through them, take your time. We've got about an hour, so as long as we can do that, we're good.
Okay, okay, all right,
Cheers.
all right. Yeah, I mean, it's quite a big subject, this, really, to get into into, you know, such a short space of time, and not everything will make sense, but it's a great introduction. well, sorry, I didn't mean to say that I'm a great introduction. I'm saying lectures are an introduction to topics usually.
Of course, I'd love for everyone to get to every shape. So yeah, take your time. We've got about another hour. So yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Cheers.
Right. So you quite often the handle part here, that lone planet, will be the funnel through which the rest of the planets will go, so that there'll always be that quality of whatever is happening in that life. So there's great self-projection through that handle, and that can often make a T-square in the chart, or a grand cross, just to bring in the aspects, which actually which does make it quite powerful if there is a T-square. So as I said, with the bold part here, where all the planets are, you've got somebody who will concentrate on their sphere of interest and will see it through that lone planet, and so it will, depending on what the planet is, it will go slowly, it will go quickly, it will go with caution, and it will grow and grow, and that will give a clue as to the planet associated with it, and it's Jupiter, because there is so much room for growth here from small acorns through that one planet. However, one variation to this is 2 planets over here, and you're looking at it making an unmistakable bucket still, even, and it's often a conjunction. So, or if it's not a conjunction or a very wide one, and you think, well, which is the important planet? Well, it's always the fastest moving, because that becomes much more personal. So if there are 2 planets, you can still have a bucket shape. Now, sometime this planet, the handle, is seen as an agitator, or the person is seen as an agitator, because remember, the main bowl shape likes to look at its own area of interest. So when it goes out through the handle into uncharted territory, as far as he or she is concerned, depending on the planet, they may cause ructions, they may cause difficulties in their search for something new, or to understand what other people are about. And this, or the other environment unknown to them, may be about. Now, if we look at Dr. Ian Stevenson, he could have been, to some extent, what is called an agitator. For those who don't know who he was a professor of psychiatry. He went through all the normal traditional channels. He was Canadian, as you can see. But he worked in a university, forget where it was. I think it was in the States. And he was allowed to do something so untraditional. Now, you would get that, wouldn't you, with Uranus being the handle in Aquarius, in the 9th house. What could he have possibly have done that was so different, that he was allowed to do this? If you look at the boundary planets, Mars and Pluto, they are linked to Scorpio, aren't they? They are linked to the difficulties, the difficult side of Scorpio. They're linked to an 8th house kind of feeling. They're linked to death. Dr. Ian Stevenson did researches into past life occurrences, looked at very much at scars that people had and how they were linked to past lives. He did an amazing amount of research back in the last century. I remember where, I can't remember exactly, I think was it 60s, 70s, something like that. And he was given this opportunity in a traditional university, but of course, Uranus isn't a planet that brings popularity, because it is so he's a bucket shape is an agitator anyway. So you've got Uranus as the handle, which is agitating away, and he absolutely upset the apple cart in traditional psychology and psychiatry. And of course, you know, 9th house is linked to universities, 9th house to the brain, to the mentality. It rules the 9th house. And the other thing I forgot to mention, which I've just remembered, with a planet that is like a high focus here, that stands out, the handle between Mars and Pluto. Uranus may not be on the midpoint of Mars and Pluto, but you can almost treat the energies between the handle planet and the boundary planets like a midpoint. So if you looked up what Uranus means on the midpoint of Mars Pluto, that would begin to give you an idea of how the three combine. Yes, and Uranus is opposing Saturn as well. So you see, he's all with the malefics. Now, he lived to a grand old age, even though there's lots of malefics, because he was dealing with very, very deep subjects. I mean, you can't get deeper than death and the afterlife. And that's what and reincarnation. This is what he was dealing with. And he was someone who was a bona fide traditional professor of psychiatry, but he went into a totally different field. So I hope that example gives some idea of the bucket and the agitator. And then you would look at Jupiter. Where's Jupiter? It's exalted in Cancer, associated planet in the 1st house. Isn't that wonderful? He was very successful. It's trining the MC. It's in a grand trine with Mercury and the MC. So yes, it shows you the mentality. And yes, and he wrote several books on the subject, and he did open up the whole question for many people, but at the same time, he was also someone that wasn't popular with everyone. Marilyn Monroe. No introductions needed. I don't know about anyone out there, but you know, when I first started astrology, and even now, people love looking at her chart because she's such an icon. But you see, there is this bucket shape with Saturn being the handle. And I think we all honed into this Saturn in the 4th house in Scorpio, which very much describes her early life, which I'm sure most of you know was linked to her many foster homes, her abuse, I understand, her feeling of lack of love, and her not knowing who her father was. A lot of that was at the back of her life. So we see, and it showed a great vulnerability. But where did the success come from? Well, you've got the boundary planets with Moon and Neptune. And so that is the vulnerability everybody saw, Moon and Neptune, across the horizon. But Moon is conjunct Jupiter, and therefore that's going to bring a great deal of success in the 7th house. And I think she was able to portray, I suppose if you look at the trine to Mars in the 8th, you know, and to Pluto from that Saturn, great sexuality, but also great vulnerability. So this is so you can begin from that Saturn as a starting point. And so you've got all these planets in the top half where she wanted very much to be famous, but she was absolutely frightened of that fame, though you'd never know it if you would see her act in films. But the root of it lay in that Saturn. So everything came through that Saturn. So if she was highly successful in fame, at least, maybe not in other ways. So what could that Saturn be doing as an agitator, or how would that Saturn be playing out in her life? And that would mean whenever she was on a film set, you couldn't get her out of the dressing room. She would be late all the time, and she would be stuck in a dressing room, and they had to come and yank her out because of the fear of that Saturn. So you can see how Saturn goes into unknown territory. But in this case, as the handle, it will go into unknown territory, but with great fear. Now, if we're looking at these charts in a lecture forum, it's not quite how you would talk to a client necessarily. So, lecture and a consultation, two different things. Okay, moving on. We have, quite happily here, we've got Uranus as the handle to, let's say, bowl. It's more like a sling here, more like a sling, which a sling is a kind of variation of a bucket. So Uranus, obviously he stood out as well, but here we've got Uranus on the 5th house, and you notice that it's stationary. So therefore, this was someone who could upset the apple cart, which he did. He went against what was expected of him. Very charismatic, and in the 5th house, great presenter and great showman in that regard. And you've got Uranus trine the ascendant. So again, you've got somebody who will stand out, who will be different, and very humanitarian as well. He was very much into civil rights. So we move on. Sorry.
Before you move on, Wanda, can you back up to Marilyn Monroe's chart?
To who? Yes, I will. Yeah.
There's a question here, and if you said it, I missed it. Do you use a lead planet in these in the bucket?
Well, there's a boundary planets, and you have the moon as you would go anti-clockwise the moon.
So the moon would
be the lead planet, and as it's the lead planet, you know, the moon, it's the public with Jupiter, the public adored her, didn't they?
Great. Yeah.
In the 7th house.
Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
right. So Taylor Swift, do you see how this is a kind of bucket? I'm showing you different versions of the same idea. The different, slightly different versions of the same shape, so that you will come across charts. You think this doesn't quite fit. It looks like a bucket or a locomotive or whatever it is, but it doesn't quite fit. But it's the nearest that you can get. And why doesn't it fit? But it's closer. Everything is much closer. So for a start, you're going to think this person is going to be very sure of themselves in so much they're going in one direction. And what is the handle? You've got your conjunction of a handle here. Moon, Jupiter, a bit like Marilyn Monroe there, but look how strong they are. Moon in rulership, Jupiter in exaltation. But this is where you would then bring in the analysis, you'd bring other aspects, other pointers, and you've got Chiron there. So I'm not quite sure what that Chiron means in somebody so successful, except she writes her own songs. I don't know what they are. I can imagine they're about love and loss to some extent, and change. I don't know if there are Swifties out there who can tell me, who know exactly what she writes about. But the way to find out what something means in a chart, if you're not quite sure, and if there's a special a conjunction, look at the degrees difference between, let's say, Jupiter and Chiron, which is about 7 or 8. And when she was around that time, around that age, the family moved from the place that she had always known. So it was a real disruption in her life. And so this could be the moon, and Jupiter is very successful, obviously, with Chiron. She may be writing about disruption, loss, leaving one place to go to another, because it could be she's writing about security. Okay, so I'm just going a little bit into that, showing you how you can begin to interpret. And all that Capricorn, as somebody said, it means a Capricorn means that you can see someone at the top of their game. People who have a lot of Capricorn in their chart often have a name like king or master or something great. So you can come to the top of your game with Capricorn. So Cancer, Capricorn, and she is top of the game. Yes, this could be seen as a seesaw. Some people will call it a seesaw, or even an hourglass shape. We'll go on to the seesaw next, but it's usually more than 2 planets the other side. Nevertheless, if you see it as a seesaw, go for the main opposition, which would be the moon and Mercury, swiftest planets, which means that she's very intelligent and a writer. And with Mercury, with Uranus, Neptune, she looks at life from the collective. So if we go on to a seesaw, seesaw. Ideally, 5 planets either side. Rarely get it. Sometimes they're not going to be exactly opposite each other, but there's going to be a lot of space in between 2 groups. And you'll find this shape deals a lot with people. They really love to be with others, and they can, depending on the planets involved, they can really connect with others very well. Or it can be combative. They like to pitch themselves against other people. They can have two distinct sides of their lives as well, and a clear demarcation between two sets of friends. But they may find sometimes it hard to reconcile themselves with themselves if they have two distinct sides. So you have to look at the basic planet, the core opposition, which will always be the two planets that are the two fastest planets that are in opposition. Now, what do you think the associated planet may be if they're always linking, if they're trying to link to somebody else? It's going to be Venus, isn't it? Because remember, Venus, yes, you're right, yes, it is Venus. But remember, Venus started a war in mythology. She asked Paris to judge which goddess was the most beautiful. And or three goddesses asked Paris, which is the most beautiful? Venus dropped her magic girdle and he couldn't resist her. And then she started a war, the Trojan War. So Venus can bring people together, can separate them as well. But as I said, it links very much to other people, whether in love or war. And this is kind of interesting with Novak Djokovic. I mean, he's a tennis player, and what could be more seesaw-ish in a person? Because they are, I mean, with a tennis player, obviously you're batting a ball against the other person, and you're in competition with them, and it's a kind of war to some extent, because you really do want to win, you know, if you're fighting a battle. So it can't be a better expression of a seesaw, because you're going from one place of the net to the other, back and forward, back and forward. So that's a kind of seesaw effect. I don't know much more about him than that. And you would look at the core opposition, which is Mercury, and Saturn. So you see that he's very shrewd, very connected to what he wants to do. But that Mercury goes into Uranus as well, doesn't it? So, you know, once he's worked out what he's going to do, he can come up with some new tricks. And the interesting thing is, Mercury's in Gemini, so it's in rulership, but Gemini rules the arms, the shoulders, and that's what he needs to concentrate on, his arms and shoulders, in playing tennis. So, Kamala Harris, this looks like a seesaw to me. As I said, if that's why sometimes it's good to forget about the nodes here and Fortuna, and just look at, you know, Saturn, Moon, and Jupiter, and Mars to Neptune. So you see, you've got a very strong, I would say, a reasonably strong anyway, seesaw. And somebody says looks like a splash. Well, as I said, everybody has to go with what they feel is right. But if you look at Neptune and Saturn, look how wide the gap is there. And if you look at Jupiter and Mars, you see the wide gap. So it is, it can't be, the two gaps either side, Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, Neptune, are quite wide. So what people are saying, or two people have said, it looks like a splash. Well, you're not wrong, and I'm not wrong, because you may feel that it is a seesaw with parts of splash behind it or connected. You may come across charts that you can't totally make up your mind about, and that it doesn't seem to be, it seems to veer towards one, but yet it veers towards another. If that's how you see it, then you have to go with what you see. A splash or a seesaw will have a core opposition as well. And here you've got Moon, Mercury, again, comes up quite a lot. But the Sun is there as well. So here you have somebody who's going to appeal to the public, and she certainly does with that 5th house, 11th house. There's a certain appeal about her with the public, in so much as that in a very short space of time, I think it's about a month or so, she has gained a great deal of popularity. So I thought you might be interested in having her there, as she may well be your next president. So it's a chart well worth looking at, I would say. Right, Celine Dion. Now this is a seesaw, but it's more towards one of its variations, which is an hourglass, because it's tighter. It's tighter. These gaps here are wider. And so, but you would still look at the core opposition. I mean, you'd go for the fastest moving, which is the Moon, but it's not in an opposition. So we've got Mercury-Venus conjunction opposing Uranus-Pluto conjunction. And of course, Mercury-Venus is often very much to do with artistic flair. In some respects, and in Pisces, it may be, and in the 9th house, it may be to do with film or singing or art, and opposition to Uranus, Pluto. I think that's Pluto. Yeah, no, where are we? Yes, Uranus, Pluto. There we are. You have somebody linked to the collective. Of course, you know, she came out of retirement, so to speak, recently to open the Olympic Games in Paris with that wonderful rendition of Edith Piaf's song. But she has been ill with stiff person syndrome, and so you can see with the Mars Saturn up there with the you've got Saturn affecting the Sun and Mars affecting the Moon. So when you've got malefics affecting the light, you may have some health problems to look at, but not always. It depends on other things. Yes, no, this is not a splash chart. This is a seesaw, or it is a variation of a seesaw, and that's an hourglass. Hourglass makes it just that little bit much more together, almost like a Roman candle. Now, this is what I think Jones and Jansky, they intermingled what they called some of these charts. Some called it seesaw, some called it hourglass. So you will come, if you read this up on the internet, just be careful what they're describing, because people use different terms.
Hello, Wanda. Sorry to interrupt again. We've got about 20 minutes for the last two remaining shapes, just to give you a
Right,
time
okay.
update. Thank you very much. It's a wonderful presentation. Thank you. Just giving you a
Thank
time
you.
update. Cheers.
Okay, Elvis Presley, this is quite it's a seesaw, but it's almost like a splash as well. So, you know, whichever way you would like to look at it, you've got if you're looking at it as a seesaw, remember charts can be almost two shapes, and you have to sort of decide which is the dominant shape. You've got Mercury, Venus in Capricorn, opposition Pluto. You know, so that could well be, you know, someone who is very, very famous, as we know Elvis Presley was. And Capricorn, remember, is the master or the king, and he was known as the king. So I have to move on to Splay. If you're looking at if you're looking at charts and really, really cannot come to any conclusion as to what shape it is, then it's usually a splay, because you've got aggregation of planets in different areas of the chart. Now, this is actually too neat for a splay. It's really too neat. Now, a splay person is not going to fit into life environments very easily. There are going to always be someone who stands outside of the norm. They go their own way, do their own thing. In some ways, they're to be envied because they don't usually worry about what other people think. I suppose you could go to the other extreme, and this person may worry about what other people think, but they have that to overcome, because they find ultimately that the only way of dealing with life is not to worry what other people think. They have to go their own way. They have to do their own thing. And so this can make them quite a genius in some ways, because they're going to think outside the box. They could be your eccentric friend, or it could be that you're the eccentric. You have to do your own thing. And the associated planet is the sun. And you may wonder about that. But the sun is about becoming your own person. It rules the present in this lifetime. And you have to learn to become your sun. So you have to learn to become yourself. And the splay person has that quality more than any other, to learn to become who they intrinsically are, which isn't like anyone else. And Nicholas Copernicus, I think, had a splay chart. He's got these planets over here, over the right side, and these planets at the bottom, and two planets standing on their own. So you would look at one of the planets standing on their own, which was Saturn, which is Saturn in Gemini in the 10th house. And, you know, he spent his life a lot of the time in fear. This is not what all his chart is about. I mean, he was the, that's wonderful, Stephanie, that you're related to Nicholas through your mum's DNA. That's wonderful. I've particularly taken an interest in him because he came up with, obviously, the heliocentric theory, and affected all the astronomers and astrologers ever since. But he spent his life in fear with that Saturn up there in the 10th, because he was going against what the church would say about the beginnings of mankind. So remember what I said about how the splay person is going to be the different person, the one that stands outside, the one who's going to bring in different ideas. And he certainly did that in a very strong way. He's squaring Pluto over here, so he's going to upset the apple cart in some way. And yet, you know, if you start looking at other areas of his chart, and if you look at Pluto and the sun, which is associated with this type of chart, you know, it was hard for him to be himself, but he had to find a way to be himself. And somebody's asked, the reason why he felt fear, Saturn rules fear. Saturn in the 10th house worries about your station in life, your reputation, and how you appear to the people in your career area. And it's a square to Pluto that will augment that fear as well. And he knows these, with the sesqui quadrant to Uranus, he knows he's going to upset people in his environment.
Wanda, we have still some questions in the chat that we're holding to the end, or in the Q&A, not in the chat, which is where we ask people to put questions for you.
Sorry, what do you want?
No,
Sorry, I didn't understand.
We have some questions that people have put in the Q&A.
Okay, shall I finish though or not?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay, yes, I will stay as long as you want me to. Okay. Not all night, but you know, reasonably. Okay, I'll move on. Sandra Bullock, another chart that looks in different areas, and I don't know much about her, but somebody did say to me that she is very much her own person and does precisely what she wants and will only take certain roles. Some people may think it's a little bit of a bucket shape with Moon Saturn up here and this being the bowl shape. So as I said, I didn't want to just present ideal shapes to you. I wanted to show you how you have to work with what you've got to try and put it into the shape that you feel it is. I'm going to move on. Now, the last one is called a bundle or a wedge. And it's usually only 3 or 4 houses that are tenanted. You often have a square or a trine between the 2 boundary planets. And this is someone who is going to very much a person who goes into one direction, someone who won't be swayed by other people's opinions, that they don't necessarily feel awkward or different like the others do, like the splay, but they know where they're going, they know what they want, and there's a lot of force, power, and magnetism here. And the downside of that is perhaps they're not always aware of what other people want because they're so geared up to where they're going, which is great for success, in fact. And Paul McCartney has this kind of chart. Now, I've got 2 p.m. here for his birth chart, but I've heard that it might be 2 a.m. So most of these, well, all of this shape will be this side of the chart at the bottom here to the right. So so we won't bother about houses, although this looks correct when you think of Sun, Jupiter on the MC there. But if you look at the boundary planets, you've got Venus, Neptune, which is very much to do with music and the arts. So, and I think we all know he's has a great sense of direction where he's been going in life. and that is associated planet is Saturn, because Saturn just moves in one direction. Saturn knows what it's to do. It works hard, basically. It's got a great sense of working hard, Saturn, and so does the bundle type. Now, Julio Iglesias is also a singer in the music business, but his boundary planets are Mercury and Uranus, which are kind of quite different to the Venus and Neptune, which we saw in Paul McCartney's chart, but the boundary planets, which immediately showed you that it was something artistic. This isn't showing you that it's something artistic. It's showing great mental acumen. Well, that's because he actually wanted to be a lawyer. He also played football. People talk about him being an ex-footballer, and you know, he did play that, but he was studying to be a lawyer. So you can see he's very shrewd here. But we would then look further into the chart to see how he became a singer, and we haven't got time for that, I'm afraid. Now, as I said, you only take the first 10 planets to look at the shape. So here it's a bundle, but you can't, there are things you can't ignore, even though they're not in your first calculation of the shape. You can't ignore the south node. So you would have to look at it and make it important in your calculation. And it's sort of linked to the career, the 4th and 10th house with that Pluto and Jupiter. So he's going to obviously have, he's going to have great connection with the public, with his career, and South Node, he's going to leave his past behind. So that is one clue as to how he will change from those boundary planets, you know, that show not music, they show something mental, you know, but with the South Node in the 4th, he's leaving something behind. It's Saturn. Saturn is the associated planet to the wedge, as I said before. With Saturn gives you that ability to move forward with every energy that is calculated and on the mark. Right, I was going to look at, I've actually come to the end, believe it or not, but I was going to look briefly at Mark Edmonds-Jones' charts, which is a bowl, as you can say, but we haven't really got time. And Robert Jansky, in his book, said he didn't know what shape his chart was, and he left it to us to decide. So, therefore, I leave it with you to decide what shape you think it is. I think it's a splay personally, but you may think otherwise. So thank you for your attention. And that's my email. If you want to get in touch with me and think and ask a question, what was your talk all about? Please let me know. I have so many questions to ask you. By all means, do contact me if you wish. And thank you very much. I'm sorry I've gone over, but I'm ready for questions.
No, wonderful. Wanda, thank you so much on behalf of Kepler College. What a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I will profusely apologize for everybody asking the questions. We are out of time. But what I do propose is that when we put the replay on YouTube, if you want to bring your questions there, you can post them in the comments below. Wanda, are you familiar with YouTube or how to get in and
I
answer
used
questions?
YouTube, yes, but
Fantastic.
not ask the questions. No, I'm doing the book review next week. Would
That's
people?
right. Yeah. So another solution.
Could people
is
ask?
that...
Could people, if they're going to that,
Absolutely.
they could ask
Yeah.
the questions then?
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. Another solution is the Q&A, which will be on the 29th with the book club. I think we can put, Don, if you're here, put the link in for the book club in the chat box that you can all attend for the Q&A. And that's going to be quite extensive. as you go through all the questions and answers. Is that correct, Wanda?
Well, I believe so. Yes, I'm you know, if there are lots of questions, are there? As I say, do email me if you have a urgent question.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Brilliant presentation. I do apologize for everybody. I know we've got 1,000 questions coming through, but unfortunately we're over time. We won't get to them all. So I think the two solutions will be when you see the replay on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days, you can post your questions in the comment boxes. And failing that, if you want to go to the Q&A with the book club Q&A, you can ask your questions. They're live, actually.
Yes, I'm not. I mean, I use YouTube, but I don't know what you're proposing with YouTube at the moment.
Sure. So the replay of this recording today will be up on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. And
Yes.
if you see a YouTube channel, I don't know if you know, underneath there are comment boxes where you can see
Yes.
comments that come through. So if you're
Right.
on YouTube, maybe you'll be able to jump in there and answer some of the questions.
Okay, so if I find your website, is that right, or YouTube channel? If I find your YouTube channel, I'll
We'll send
see
it
the
to you.
questions. Okay, thank you.
Correct. That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, two solutions. We can do the YouTube and the comments below, or the Q&A, which will be on the 29th.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for being such a great audience with your lovely comments.
Thank you for going in depth. I know there's a lot of information to go through and all the chart patterns. Thank you all for your questions again. I profusely apologize we couldn't get to the Q&A today, but the two solutions are if you can go to the YouTube channel, put the comments below on the replay, or go to the Q&A on the 29th.
I've just posted
Okay.
a link to the Facebook group. If anyone can see that.
So is the link, is the link in the chat?
Yeah, I've posted it in the chat. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Wanda, for a fantastic presentation. And thank you all for zooming in all around the world. We love our worldwide KeplerCollege community. And again, apologies for the lack of Q&A today, but you can either go to the YouTube replay or the Q&A.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I used too many charts, I think, you know, but.
Great job. Brilliant, beautiful examples and absolutely spot on. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you then. Good
Bye.
night. Oh, good night, I'm saying.
Good
afternoon.
Late.
Bye.
Is it 8 o'clock in England now? I'm not sure.
It is, yes, coming up, yes.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Cheers.